Hey folks, Vince the Evil DM here, doing a just thinking video. I used to do these all the time when people emailed me questions to the channel. So I got a couple questions, and I repeatedly get this question all the time, and a couple names come to mind here: Jason, Jeff, not the Jeff that handles the show, another Jeff, Jeff with a J, and Tom have emailed me in the past asking me, hold on a second here, let me get my phone. How do I get new, younger players into the OSR and old school gaming is basically the topic I get emailed often. Because I have explained many times that I have taken a 5e group and moved them into AD&D 1e. When I approach the subject of playing older games or old school gaming, I try to relay that it is a kind of a mentality or state of playing, because when we played originally, all we had were the books. And if we didn't like something, we just basically did what we wanted to do, because who cares? Who were there to impress? Just our friends, right? Just people sitting on the table. As long as everybody was having fun, who cares? The only internet we had, so to speak, was BBS's online, which was dial-up localized to the area. We had chats, like AOL chats later on. Or basically, during the 80s, all we had was Dragon Magazine or any of the various magazines that had advice in them from the creators. Or you could write your own snail mail to TSR and ask them a question and hope they would write back, which could take months. So we basically did what we wanted to do. It was a state of mind, a state of play, and everybody enjoyed it. Now, moving here, 40 years later, we now have internet. We have the ability to do these videos, which you're watching right now. People can seek out advice from anybody, and a lot of people go online to impress other people and not remember that D&D is just a game for fun. There's no realism in the game, though, I mean, there's some realism in certain things because you have to suspend disbelief about most things. But getting newer players into it is a matter of letting them dive into it and seeing how it is. What I did to entice my 5e players back then, when I was trying out 5e in 2016, I would bring the books with me to the game and read them at the table. And a lot of these younger kids that are new to D&D saw them, and they knew about them only because of the simple fact of they've heard about it, or they've done their research when they're looking up other games. They've seen them, but never played it. Or they're like, wait, what? That says Dungeons & Dragons, but that's different than the book that I have. I got a couple of those. It's a matter of letting them look at the book as well and showing them that there are open possibilities with these things as opposed to everything's in the book. And anything is possible. So the next step, which I did do, was actually just running the game and immersing them into the game. Rolling up characters. They saw that rolling up characters took a matter of only minutes. Sure, some of them wrote some backstories. Why not? That's what people do. People like backstories, so they're going to write backstories. Let them do it. I said you didn't need that. You really didn't want to. You could do backstories on the fly, which a lot of people did. So once I got them to sit down and actually agree to play the game, and they were immersed into it, they saw that they actually had to think outside the box. It actually, I could see in certain players, a light go on in their head when they actually had to think. As opposed to when you're playing newer editions. Now, I'm not slighting on newer editions. People enjoy what they want to play. But in newer editions, everything is basically on your sheet. If it's not on your sheet, chances are you can't do it, or you have to really, really ask and hope the DM has something for you, which most of them don't, because there's no rule. A lot of people are stuck in the box of if there's no rule for it, it doesn't happen. With old school gaming, it was you have to make a lot of adjudications. You have to make a lot of room for the what-ifs. So once they were immersed in playing 1E, it was like they had this new outlook on D&D, and it was just like, whoa, okay, wow, I could do this, I could do that. And when they would roll dice, it was kind of amazing to watch them roll dice and be like, did I hit? Because they didn't understand the charts. Not until I showed them the charts. And they're like, well, okay. Which is funny because a lot of them do enjoy the math and figuring those things out. Some people don't. But you show them all these things and say, this is where D&D came from. This is the roots of D&D. This is how D&D is played. There is a threat level with D&D. Death lurks around every corner. That's how D&D was meant to be played. That's how Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson wanted D&D to be played. That you could die at any moment. You aren't superheroes. You aren't built to handle everything. Sometimes you have to use your mind to get around a situation. You can't just run in and attack everything. Sure you could, but you'd probably die. That's what happens in 1E or basic D&D. When there's 5E, I mean, you got that little bit of protection because you know the monsters are fair to your level. And you know that they're built around you, unless the DM, of course, is up front in your, character creation session and question session or session 0, whatever you want to call it, and says, we're not going to play by my luck. I'm going to change the following things. So you know up front. But if it's a standard 5e game, you know every monster you meet is pretty much going to be balanced for your level character class or group in general. With 1e, you don't know. And that was what captured a lot of people into playing older edition games. With that said, I also introduced them to the people that were creating new games as well. There are tons and tons of things on Drive to RPG which a new player can peruse through and see that 5e is not the be-all, end-all. And there are tons of games with similar mechanics that they can play that will give them probably a better time. Maybe. Depends on the person again. Again, I'm not slighting another edition. I don't really want to cause edition wars. I think I'm more like... Well, I'm leaning more towards my co-host from Unscripted Evil, Ian Bloodworth, when he says he calls it 5e only. Because at this point, Wizards of the Coast has taken D&D and it's D&D in name only. Now, you can agree with me, disagree with me, say I'm an idiot. I don't care. When I reference playing D&D now, I reference playing AD&D. I really don't say D&D because most people will refer to that as 5e. I say AD&D because that's where my roots are. Gygax Edition D&D. And a lot of people are newer will say, isn't that old edition that, from the 80s? And you'll say, yeah. That's the edition that I learned to play with, and it's the edition you need to learn yourself. Learning that edition will definitely help your gaming experience, so to speak. It will show you a different world. It will show you a world of mystery, magic, and fun. I can't tell you how much fun I had playing 1E as a kid in the park at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 when I was supposed to be going to summer camp because we dropped off every day to go to summer camp, but instead we sat around and played D&D. Parents didn't really know about that until later on, but it was a fun time. Like I said, these newer players need to experience their own, and sure, 5e is a good gateway to get into D&D, but there are tons of other games out there. Marvel Superheroes, Conan, Indiana Jones, Top Secret. Things I'm looking around my room here, all the things on my shelf, so I'm trying to figure some other games out for you. Star Wars, D6. These are all games that people don't realize are great games, but they disregard them because they're old editions. So while this may not be an exact answer to get people into it, because there's really no way of telling, there's only things you could try, like I did. It worked for the most part. I got myself a full group. I moved away from 5e. They moved away from 5e. So who knows if it'll work for you? It could. I don't know. See what happens. Try it. Bring some of your books to a game, a public game. Sit there and read them quietly. See if people start asking you questions. Or find some people in the group and be like, hey, did you ever play this edition? And they'll look at it and they may say no. They probably will say no. And you could say, you ever think about it? It's a lot of fun. And chances are they probably will. If they're a good gamer, or like a true, real good gamer, they probably will be like, oh, I'm interested in seeing what it's all about. Most gamers are interested in playing just about any game unless it's some weirdo, narrative, I don't know what to call it, game that doesn't use dice. I think you know what type of game I'm talking about. There are some games that even I, as a good gamer, will not play. I mean, I have to have some type of dice mechanic that makes sense. There's certain things like Fate. No slight to the Fate people or Fudge people out there. I just don't get that system at all. So, try it. Bring the book. Start reading it. See what the younger kids say. Chances are they'll probably latch onto it only for the simple nostalgia of, oh, I heard about that edition. That was the one in the 80s where everybody thought it was satanic. They want to see what it's all about. Heck, when I sit at the comic book store sometimes when I'm waiting, I'll be reading a Palladium book and some people will be like, what's that? And they'll want to see the book and look over that book. So, it really depends on the person, the intrigue, and how much you can capture them in. Yes. But, all right, hopefully that did answer a little bit for you. I know it's been on a bunch of YouTube channels, and some people bring it up constantly and never actually really answer the video and just kind of just give roundabout solutions. I'm not sure if this is an actual solution, but it is a bunch of really good suggestions to get people into it and try to get them to play the game. So keep sending in your questions, and we'll try to keep answering them. AskTheDM@theevildm.com is my email address. And I will say have a great weekend. And Unscripted Evil is tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, to think about that. Right here on my channel. So have a great, is it Labor Day weekend? Yeah, Labor Day weekend. And enjoy your time off with your family. Hug your loved ones, and talk to you soon. Keep it original, keep it old school. Good night, everybody.